The blood vessels that will carry the blood towards the heart, those are veins. And the blood vessels that will carry the blood away from the heart, those are arteries. Here, in this part of the chapter, we are focusing on the systemic arteries and veins, starting first with the systemic arteries. If we're looking on here, this is my left ventricle. And remember, all systemic arteries are branches from the left ventricle from the aorta. The aorta has a part that travels up, and we call this is my ascending aorta. And part of it that will be curving, traveling from the right side to the left side, like this. We call this is my aortic arch. And part of the aorta, as you see on here, is going to be traveling down. This is the descending aorta. And as you see, it travels first in the chest. So we're going to call the part of the descending aorta that travels in the chest. This is my thoracic aorta. And as it travels through the diaphragm, it's now passing down into the abdominal cavity. So we're going to call this part of the descending aorta is my abdominal aorta. Looking first at the branches coming out from the ascending aorta, if you remember, we've got two branches that will be given the blood supply to the heart tissue itself. And those are my right and left coronary arteries. This is from the proximal part of the aorta, which we call the ascending aorta. From the aortic arch, we've got three branches. First one on the right side, this is going to be my brachiocephalic trunk. Then we've got the left common carotid. And the left subclavian. So again, what we're looking at in here, we're looking at the aortic arch and its branches. This is my aortic arch. First branch from the aortic arch is my brachiocephalic trunk. Next is going to be the common carotid on the left side. This is my left common carotid artery. And the next branch is going to be the left subclavian artery. For the brachiocephalic trunk, it splits into two branches, one that ascends going up, and one that will travel below the clavicle. So the one going up, this is my right common carotid artery. And the one that travels below the clavicle on the right side, this is going to be my right subclavian artery. So again, what we are looking at right now, we are looking at the branches of the aortic arch. First branch of the aortic arch is going to be my brachiocephalic trunk. Second branch is going to be my left common carotid artery. And the third branch is going to be my left subclavian artery. Remember, brachiocephalic trunk splits into two branches, right subclavian artery and a right common carotid artery. Any trouble with the branches of the aortic arch? Anybody is still here? All right. So again, how many branches do I have for the aortic arch? How many branches? 3. Brachiocephalic trunk, left common carotid artery, left subclavian artery. How many branches from the carotid arch, from the brachiocephalic trunk? Got 2. Right common carotid and right subclavian artery. All right, great. So what happens to each of the common carotids? So right and left. Each common carotid splits into two branches, one that travels to the inside of the skull to supply the brain, and another branch that will be traveling outside of the skull to supply the face and scalp. Same happens on the left side. One branch that passes to the inside of the skull, the other branch travels outside of the skull. What do we call the ones that are traveling to the inside of the skull to supply the brain with blood? Those are my internal carotid arteries. What do you think? Would we name the ones that are traveling outside of the skull if the ones traveling inside are internal carotids? What do you think? We're going to name the ones traveling outside of the skull? Can you guess? If the ones inside are internal carotids, can you guess what do we call the ones traveling outside to supply the face and scalp? Those are my external carotid arches. All right, so again, this is going to be my left ventricle. This is the proximal part of my aorta, ascending aorta. Then I have my aortic arch. Three branches coming out from the aortic arch, brachiocephalic trunk, left common carotid artery, and the artery that travels below the clavicle, so we called it the subclavian. On the left, it's going to be my left subclavian or clavian artery. This is my left common carotid artery. Remember, brachiocephalic trunk or artery will give rise to two branches. One that travels up, this is going to be my right common carotid artery, and one that travels below the clavicle on the right side. So this is going to be my right subclavian artery. Remember, each common carotid gives rise to branch that travels inside the skull, supplies the brain, and the branch that will be traveling outside of the skull to supply the face and scalp. Remember, the ones traveling inside, those are my internal carotid arteries. Compared to the ones outside, those are my external carotid arteries. So if we're drawing here, this is going to be the clavicle like this. This is going to be the neck. This is going to be the shoulder. Here this is going to be the chest of this guy. So what happens to the subclavian artery, either on the right or on the left? Subclavian arteries going to be passing in the armpit. So something related to the armpit, if you remember, is called axillary. So subclavian artery was traveling below the clavicle. Now it passes in the axillary region. So we're going to call this as my axillary artery. Axillary artery will keep traveling down, passing through the arm. So an artery that is related to the arm, remember something related to the arm is called brachial. So we're going to call this artery is my brachial artery. Brachial artery splits into two terminal branches. One that travels on the lateral side of the forearm and one that travels on the medial side of the forearm. Remember, what bone was located on the lateral side of the forearm? Remember, what are the two bones of the forearm? Radius and ulnar, right? So which one was lateral? Which one was medial? Which one was on the same side as the thumb? First, radius is lateral. So remember, when you check the radial pulse, you're gonna touch the lower part of the forearm just above the thumb. This is my radius, and radius is lateral. Radius is lateral, and which one is medial? The ulna is medial. So on the same side as the radius, what do you think we're going to call this artery on the outside, on the lateral side of the forearm? This is going to be my, on the same side as the radius, this is going to be my radial artery. Can you guess the name of the other artery, this time on the medial side? Ulnar artery, exactly. So again, what is the blood supply of the four or on the lateral side? You've got radial artery. On the medial side, you've got the ulnar artery. All right, so again, what we're discussing here, we are discussing the systemic arteries, which are simply branches from the aorta. Remember, first part of the aorta, we call this part is my ascending aorta. And we've mentioned two branches coming from the ascending aorta that we discussed in the previous chapter, right and left coronary arteries and their branches. Those are branches coming from the proximal part of the aorta, ascending aorta. Then what happens to the aorta? Aorta travels like this, forming the aortic arch. Again, how many branches did I get from the aortic arch? Got three: brachiocephalic, artery or trunk, left common carotid, left subclavian artery. Those are the three branches coming from my aortic arch. Brachiocephalic artery, remember, it gives rise to right common carotid artery and right subclavian artery. Each of the common carotids, remember, gives rise to a branch traveling to the inside of the skull to supply the brain, and another branch that travels outside to supply the face and scalp. So ones traveling inside, those are my internal carotids. The ones traveling outside, those are my external carotids. What happens to the subclavian artery, either on the right or on the left? Subclavian travels down in the armpit. We call this is my axillary artery. And then travels down to the arm, it becomes the brachial artery. Then it will split in the cubital region, the cubital fossa, into a lateral branch and a medial branch. What do we call the lateral branch? It's my radial artery. What do we call the medial branch? This is my ulnar artery. Any difficulty? Any difficulty so far? All right, so moving on to the next part of the aorta, which is the descending aorta. Remember, descending aorta has a part that travels in the chest. Remember, we call this is my thoracic aorta. Thoracic aorta travels through the diaphragm and will be called the abdominal aorta. We don't require you to know any branches coming from the thoracic aorta, but we've got a lot of branches coming from the abdominal aorta that we need for our upcoming exam. So abdominal aorta traveling down through the abdomen. It gives rise to first branch. This is called my celiac trunk. Celiac trunk gives rise to three branches. One that will give the blood supply to the liver. And if you remember, something related to the liver is called hepatic. So what do you think we're going to call this artery that will be supplying the liver? Any guesses? What do you think we're going to name the artery that supplies the liver? It's my hepatic artery. Exactly. And the branch that will go to supply the spleen. What do you think we're going to name the branch of the celiac trunk that will go to supply the spleen? If the one that is supplying the liver is hepatic, what do you think is going to be the one that supplies the spleen? It's going to be my splenic artery. And one of many branches that will be supplying the stomach. And remember, something related to the stomach is called gastric. But this one is on the left side. So this one is going to be my left gastric artery. So again, what are those branches? Those are branches from the celiac trunk, which is the first branch coming out from the abdominal aorta. What are again those three branches? One that supplies the liver, this is my hepatic artery. One supplies the spleen, this is my splenic artery. And one that will join to supply the stomach, this is going to be my left gastric artery. What comes next is the artery that will be sharing in the blood supply of the small intestines and the proximal part of the large intestine. Remember, what comes after the stomach, what is attached to the stomach, below it, it's going to be small intestine. And something related to intestines is called mesenteric. We've got two mesenteric arteries. This is the one located above. So we call this is my superior mesenteric artery. And again, what's going to be supplied is going to be the small intestines and part of the large intestine. Our next branch are actually two branches coming from the side, right and left sides. That will be supplying the blood to the kidneys. What do you think we're going to call those arteries that are supplying the blood to the kidneys? Something related to the kidneys is called what? Renal. So those are my right and left renal arteries. Next is going to be the other artery that will be supplying the remaining part of the large intestines that didn't get supply from the superior mesenteric artery. So what do you think we're going to name this artery? This is located below the superior mesenteric artery. What do you think? Can you guess what's going to be the name? If the superior one is called superior, how about the inferior one? Any other answer? Any other response? Inferior mesenteric artery, exactly. This is going to be supplying the blood to the remaining part of the large intestines that didn't get blood supply from the superior mesenteric artery. Those are the branches coming from the abdominal aorta before it splits into two terminal branches. Those are my right and left common iliac arteries. Each common iliac gives rise to a branch that will travel towards the inside of the pelvis, and another one that will be traveling towards the thigh. So the one that will be going to the inside of the pelvis, this takes place on the right and left sides, right? The same is on the right, on the left side. So the branch that will be responsible to supply the pelvic organs travels to the inside of the pelvis. This is going to be my internal iliac artery. And the one that will not be traveling to the inside of the pelvic cavity travels outside here. This is going to be my external iliac artery. External iliac artery is going to be traveling below the inguinal ligament into the thigh. And if you remember, something related to the thigh is called femoral, right? So it becomes the femoral artery. So as a continuation of the external iliac artery, femoral artery is going to be running down the length of the thigh and will keep traveling down and backwards until it reaches the posterior aspect here of the knee. If you remember something related to the posterior aspect of the knee, what do we call this region in the body? Popliteal. So what do you think we're going to name this artery that travels in the posterior aspect of the knee? It's my popliteal artery. Popliteal artery going to split into two branches. One that travels on the anterior side of the leg, and one that will be traveling in the posterior aspect of the leg. Can you remind me, what did we call the large bone of the leg? We did have two bones in the leg. What was the large one of them? It's my tibia, right? So here we're gonna refer to the leg as something related to the tibia. So we're gonna call this as my anterior tibial artery. Can you guess the name of the posterior one? If this one is traveling anteriorly, and this one is traveling posteriorly, and this one we called the anterior tibial artery. So what do we call this one? Posterior tibial artery. All right, anterior tibial artery will keep moving down and passes to travel in the superior surface of the foot. Remember, when I bend my foot like this, what did we call this movement? This is my foot like this. And I am moving it upwards. What did we call this movement? Here. Dorsiflexion, exactly. Dorsiflexion. So remember, the superior surface of the foot here is called the dorsal surface, dorsal. This is the back of the foot. All right, so here, this is the artery that will travel in the dorsum of the foot. So what would we call it? We're gonna give it a name that is related to the dorsum of the foot. If you remember, something related to the foot is pedal, right? So we're gonna call this artery is my dorsalis pedis artery. Dorsalis travels on the dorsum of the foot, and pedis is the foot itself. So the dorsalis pedis means the artery that travels on the dorsum of the foot. All right. Any questions? Any questions?